Welcome back, everybody. I appreciate you joining us again today for, I guess this would be the eighth one of these. Last time we went back through what we discussed in edition 6. Then we stepped off and talked a bit about the importance of monitoring and acting upon each of the resilience drivers as you go forward. Knowing and understanding at a deep level all the details associated with each and documenting that where necessary. Really, we talked a bit about creation of a dashboard or some representation that you could use to continue to monitor each of the aspects that we're looking at. We talked a bit about the alignment of sales cycle and buy cycle processes and what each are. And, I encouraged you to sort of begin looking at what are the decision steps that your customers are taking, whether online or offline, doesn't really make a difference. We talked a little bit about identifying and monitoring the broadest available range of distribution channels, looking at the possibility even of partnering with would-be competitors as a strategy to get more reach in the market. And the importance of setting up contracts and volume commitments from those partners to get the predictability advantage and reduce risk, increase resilience and value. And we talked about the potential upside provided by doing those kinds of things. I know, I think I saw Evan here somewhere earlier. He and his team got on the phone with me yesterday and talked a bit about this aspect. They had a large number of contracts with partners, distribution partners, and the question was, they typically get month-to-month extensions after the first period of time, maybe 90 days or so. And the question was, is it better to get a long-term contract or continue on with the month-to-month? And my answer was that I think that the longer the duration of contract you can establish, the more predictable your projections can be, that in a documented, bona fide way, so to speak, that's going to be perceived as risk reduction, which increases resilience and value. So a longer term is better than shorter term. Obviously, usually those partners would look for a way to negotiate a termination clause of some sort. So in your contracts, I think you want to make sure that there's obviously got to be a way to terminate for cause. That should have immediate effect. But for non-cause, probably look at a notification term of, I wouldn't accept less than 30 days, but 60 or 90 days is not unreasonable either, sort of depending on how much effort it takes to wind down or spin up a new partner. So, that's really justification for that, is that, if we're going to change, if their change in posture changes your go-to-market business model, then you want to be protected from the effect of that for as long a period of time as you can negotiate. So today, what we want to talk a little bit about is a little bit more in depth on sales and marketing. And I just want to check, Anissa, did you get the outline I sent?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm going to look for your contribution here. And really at a high level, when you think in terms of sales and marketing, I want you to constantly look through the lens of repeatability, predictability, sustainability. So those are sort of the three adjectives that I think you want to consider as you look at your sales and marketing system. I mean, obviously, there's a part of your sales and marketing that is just, we used to say in the sales game, massive action solves all problems. So it's just really more about getting out there, getting the message to people, whether online or offline. But I think you want to look at your leverage points. Where are the ways that you can create repeatability in a systematic way. Where are the ways that you can ensure sustainability of the commitment from the client over time? I know that for some that are selling service products, a longer term engagement, as I just mentioned, is going to create that. For people that are selling software as a service solutions, the longer term engagement commitment you have, the more sustainable and predictable your business is, the more resilient it is, the more valuable it is, right? So part of that involves, your messaging, and when you look at this aspect of your business, there's a series of questions that you want to ask yourself. Are we as effective as we can be in our sales and marketing processes? Is it easy to share or to train or to empower other people, other representation, whether they be employees or contractors or affiliates or partners, with the tools they need to be effective as well? The bottom line is this. I think that sales channels, and within them salespeople, have a natural attraction to things that are relatively easy to convert and relatively profitable in a margin standpoint over time. So you want to make your sales processes, be they online or offline, as easy as possible for a new person to understand, whether they be a partner, an employee, or online, even your customers, so that they understand what they're getting into as they move forward. So, definition of that process and really having a clear understanding of why you're taking the steps you're taking throughout the sales process. And as I mentioned last week and explained in some detail, the distinction between sales cycle and buy cycle, this is what we're really talking about here. It really means that you've taken the time to understand what is the process that your customers are going to use to make a buying decision, and how do you facilitate that decision process, right? So that's a key element. And if you have that in a place that is then easily exchanged with other people, so they understand this is the process we follow, this is what works, this is what doesn't work. Obviously, there's an opportunity for creative salespeople to take some creative license in the detail of how they go about having that. So, for instance, I might have shared with you somewhere along the way that at one point in time, when I was selling enterprise software with one of my companies, we had a sales process with our team, and we set up weekly objectives. We called it the 884, and every sales rep had the objective of finding 8 new name accounts. So that's 8 customers or 8 prospects that they had not identified previously. We had them go on a minimum of 8 sales engagements or calls. In some cases, if they were phone selling, then obviously that was a phone engagement. If it was a face-to-face or belly-to-belly sales call, that was that. And then we had 4 customer events, and we modified that at one point in time and said that lunches didn't count. So this is really more appropriate for heavier duty, more enterprise oriented selling, but you can use it as a framework and adapt it to setting up your objectives. And the way we settled on that was that we could measure, because we documented all of this, we could measure that 884 generally produced optimum results for the average skilled salesperson. So you didn't have to be a superstar, you just had to be willing to do the work. So it also gives you the ability to align your marketing investment with your sales engagement. In other words, if I had a sales team of 10 people and I expected them to do the 884, I was going to have to be willing and able to generate 80 new opportunities a week for them to be distributed across those salespeople so they could actually perform at the level I wanted to perform. So obviously we would work to over deliver there. But the point was, we had a responsibility as an organization through our marketing channel to develop enough new opportunity so that the salespeople could engage on that opportunity and go out and execute on the plan. So when you set up a contextual framework of objectives, you get a whole lot of benefit. First of all, you've shown and you're able to show to investors and buyers or whoever that you have a model of predictability. You know what it takes to be successful and accomplish the objectives, the financial objectives you have as a company, as a region, as a district, as an individual, whatever the case might be. It sort of all layers down. You also have the ability at that point to associate the appropriate kinds of incentives for the sales and marketing people you have working for you or representing you. So it's one thing to have a commissioned salesperson, and in many cases in the enterprise world today, it's not directly applicable to everything you do, but if you're a solopreneur, then this applies to you personally. You want to have your version of the 884, and you want to translate that back to, okay, how much demand do I need to create so that I can make those 8 phone calls a week or whatever the case might be. If you have an organization that you're building, something like what you're doing, Jonathan, you want to make sure that you have the ability to assign that out as a set of weekly or you could multiply it in monthly objectives so that you can see whether or not your team is performing at a level that's going to sustain the business. This is the whole thing, is that the projections that you're creating are not just pulled out of thin air. It demonstrates that you've given thought to the fact that, okay, if I have 10 salespeople, each of them are doing 8 appointments a week, each of them are doing finding 8 new name accounts, each one of them are doing 8 appointments, each one of them are doing the things necessary to develop close personal relationships, then I can see that I can build my projections based on factual evidence, not just something drawn out of thin air and not just a hope and a prayer. Then I have the ability to go to those salespeople and shift their behavior in a manner that delivers a higher probability of success on a dynamic basis. So let's say, for instance, you're going to come up with a new version of the product or a new, you want to launch a new incentive program. You have the basis to associate that program with real returns on the business. It's not just hocus pocus. Does that make sense? Okay. So the way that would look is if you have, let's say, a commission salespeople or maybe yourself. I mean, if you think about putting the structure in place just to pay yourself, I mean, many solopreneurs, they don't really structure their compensation. They might have a payroll that's run every week because that's what good tax practice is, and that might just be an ongoing thing. And at the end of the month, they take the net dividends of the business and divide it up and call that profit or whatever, however you handle your distribution of capital. But if instead of just doing that willy-nilly, you put structure to it and said, well, no, this is in order for me to tap into that extra cash that I have sitting around at the end of the month, I need to have accomplished these specific objectives, as if you're holding yourself accountable to a sales objective that you would assign to a salesperson if you had one, see? So that you can create structure, and structure creates predictability. It also creates the value of exchange for the person investing and ultimately acquiring the business. Because if they know that you have measurable results associated with these individual objectives, they can reproduce those same kinds of performance objectives and make their investment return more effectively. So that, let's say you're going to launch something new and you want to create an incentive around it. It's very easy to add a management objective to say, okay, so you have the 884, those are 3 objectives. Then you might have some particular performance metrics associated with versions of the product, or if you have what we often had was, we had software maintenance, and we had service dollars. and we would want the distribution of our revenue to be appropriate across those three categories. So just because you had a sales rep making 100% of his number, if he made it all on maintenance, then he wasn't adding net value to the license value of the business. So you'd want to split that apart and say, okay, well, we're not going to pay 100% commission just on that. We have to allocate this across the objectives that serve the business. So having structure in this area gives you ability to provide the appropriate incentives for the appropriate outcome in the field or in the sales engagements. Likewise, sort of going out the other end of the funnel, you have the ability to go back to your marketing organization and say, okay, so this is how we're modeling our business. What we need from you is the demand creation necessary to accomplish all these objectives. So that includes net new opportunities sufficient to support 8 new name accounts a week per sales rep, for example. It includes marketing to our existing customers the benefits of signing an extended services contract or software warranty or product warranty or something like that. It would extend to, let's say you're going to launch something like a financing program. This is particularly useful in early stage and solopreneur companies where, you're faced with a difficult choice sometimes when you're dealing with a client who, if your objective is to generate $100,000 a year in sales per client, something like that, with whether it's consulting or advisory or coaching or something, right? Then, okay, how do you map that into some specific metrics that you can monitor and monetize for yourself so that it aligns with the objectives of the business? So and then what does that mean in terms of creating demand? What investments are you gonna have to make in order to put that much opportunity of that type into the pipeline so that you're able to convert that opportunity into the kind of revenue that's going to maximize the value of the business? So far, so good? Okay, so it's really having an understanding of the sales dynamic, the buying process, then back to the sales process, then from the sales process back to the marketing process, right? So that's going to be a forcing function for you to do the right kind of market research, right? So that, as you're engaging with these clients, I know we talked some weeks ago about the importance of having your avatar very well defined. This is the forcing function that requires you to get to the next level of detail on who the target customer really is. When you look at different kinds of customers or different types of opportunities, you're going to have different buy cycles. Therefore, you're going to have to adjust your sales cycle to match those buy cycles. And then therefore, you're going to have to align your marketing investment with those two adjusted features of your sales program. So if you have all that thinking done and you have an appropriate representation of that thinking modeled into the business, and then you have a training infrastructure or a way to communicate those objectives as, number one, part of compensation, but number two, as part of the go-to-market sales and marketing plan, you have now created a predictable, repeatable business model that reduces risk dramatically and increases value dramatically, right? So, and that's the key right there, is that, we've probably all seen or heard or worked with people who are just, we call them the eagle salespeople. They don't even know why they're as good as they are. They just are. They always produce the numbers. They always produce the results. They're always ahead of quota, whatever the case might be, right? But if you ask them how they do what they do, they couldn't possibly tell you. Well, those are the people you want to model. So you want to take the time to understand, how are they accomplishing this? What are they doing that's different from everybody else? What are they doing that's different from perhaps me? And how can I learn from that? And then how can we model that into a process that we we can use to train or empower or equip both your direct salespeople as well as your channels, right? Remember, one of the things I covered last week, I think it was, is the importance of you wrapping your arms around those channels and helping them be, number one, more successful selling your product than any other product they represent. The more you help them, the more they're going to engage in supporting your business, right? Because they're going to make more money representing you than they are something else, right? So this is an important aspect that sort of permeates beyond that. The same thing applies across all of your shareholders, all of your stakeholders. So, imagine, I actually missed this one for a number of years. And one day I just had an inspiration that, hey, I don't think the rest of my company really understands this aspect of our business. They see, the engineers or the development team might see, salespeople as salespeople, and they don't really know anything about what is the salesperson actually out there doing day in and day out in order to generate the revenue necessary to pay their salaries and support the business. And so I found that if I took the time to sit down with the entire company, whether as a single group or broke it up into work groups, whichever, and share with them the information about our sales and marketing go-to-market strategy, our sales and marketing processes, how we measure, how we maintain, how we monitor, how we adjust what we're doing to optimize the performance of the business. Believe it or not, they can now have a much better appreciation for what's actually driving the revenue, and they can actually adjust what they're doing in order to serve that more effectively. So I'll tell you a little bit of an anecdotal story, and I'm sure those of you who've had this experience will appreciate it. I know you have, Jonathan. When you build software, you're building a product, right? And so you go to your engineer and you say, hey, when's the product going to be ready? Well, they're going to give you a date, let's say it's June 15th, right? And so you build all of your sales and marketing plans around June 15th. The problem is that there's not a clear definition of what a product is, because to an engineer, a product is one thing. To a developer, the product is one thing. To the sales and marketing team, the product is something else entirely. And to the customer, the product is something else entirely. So what I observed was our sales and marketing team would go to the engineering product reviews and they say, when will this be ready? They say June 15th. So these guys run off and they do all their sales training, create all the collateral, create the distribution model, spend the money on the marketing. And then June 15 comes and you have a functional product that doesn't have a box, it doesn't have a software license agreement, it doesn't have a whole product, right? It's not a product, it's an operating piece of code. That's not a product, at least not to the sales and marketing people, and certainly not to the customers, right? So, there's this kind of automatic disconnect where if you had shared the process of selling and the process of necessary, so, that would look like this, where they're sharing with the engineering or the development team that part of the buy process is a legal review of our SLA. Well, that never occurred to a developer that we had to do that. Why would that? I mean, that's just a paper in a box. Why would you ever have to review that? Well, because the customer's legal team wants to review it and they want to have some input on whether or not they're going to agree to the terms of that SLA. Now, this could apply to any kind of contract, but you get the general idea, right? So if they were aware of that, they would know that, when they answer the question, when's the product going to be done, they would know that, well, what he means is when is it going to be in a box, ready to ship with an SLA and some shrink wrap around it. Now that goes back a ways because now you download products, but you get the same basic idea. Now all that's done online, but without it, you don't have a complete product to sell. And in fact, in many cases, you can't actually realize the revenue on that sale unless those things are all in place, right? So this is the kind of thing I mean. If you go through the process of understanding all of these things, you build your sales and marketing processes, your sales and marketing model around these things, then you communicate those throughout your organization and throughout your partner channels and throughout your sales and marketing organization. now you have something that is very repeatable, very predictable, and easily exchanged, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about customer contracts. I think I've said really probably all that needs to be said there, but let me just reiterate it. Uh, Long-term commitments are more valuable than short-term commitments. Contracts that are specific in nature and provide detail of what they're getting and what they're paying for what they're getting are better than those that are more general in nature, right? Um, so any chance you get, you want to create that ability. Now, in the world of digital marketing and online sales, that can take the form of subscription revenue or recurring subscription volume, that type of thing. But even then, depending on what you're selling, you want to make sure that they have agreed to the terms and conditions of purchase and so on and so forth. Those are details that are fundamentally necessary to establish the kind of predictability and repeatability that we're talking about that drives resilience and value into the business, right? There might be warranty terms, or there might be usage terms, or in some cases, indemnification terms. It's a broad range of possibilities, but you need to make sure you've attended to those details. Some of you know that we're working very aggressively to launch something with my partner, Melinda, in the podcasting network. Well, there's an enormous amount of complexity in the indemnification and terms of use of a network like that they're very complicated. At the end of the day, the business model is quite simple. The podcasters pay a monthly subscription and they get their listeners to listen to their podcast, and that's sort of the go to market for the subscriptions. The biggest revenue source is on the ad side, and those are fairly simple constructs, but the detail associated with getting all of that done in a way that accommodates the legalities and the terms and conditions associated with who's going to do what for who under what conditions are very complex. So you want to think all the way through those things as you develop this go-to-market sales and marketing model. We talked a bit about metrics. There are all kinds of metrics that you want to look at. The key is you want the metrics that you're tracking and monitoring on an ongoing basis, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, to represent the objectives of the business. So everything flows down. If you're going to say, we're going to do $100 million this year, well, okay, that's great. But now translate that down, all the way down to the individual objectives of everyone that's involved in producing that $100 million. So again, you have the mechanisms in place if you have the information and the data compiled. So we would put together management objectives all the way through the organization. So, you'd start at the highest level. I'd have a management objective as the CEO. Then each of my directors or vice presidents would have management objectives associated to their role, which fed into my objectives. They would all have managers or directors who would be reporting to them. They would have individual contributors reporting into them. And the whole thing would break down so that you're able to associate the individual performance at the lowest level of granularity with the corporate performance at the highest level of granularity, right? So you want to know what you're monitoring and why you're monitoring. It's not just random numbers, right? So that way, again, you're building in the resilience of your business. If something changes, you can actually see where it's affected the business. Now, that can be used in a lot of different ways, but most importantly, it empowers you to take the right action to fix the problem where the problem exists, right? Does that make sense? Let's say, as an example, you get a new competitor in your market and you start to see sales of a certain category in a certain channel begin to diminish, right? You wouldn't know it if you weren't monitoring those factors. You wouldn't understand why is it all of a sudden that our big partner, isn't delivering on their sales volumes that they delivered to before. What are we missing? How can we provide an incentive to their salespeople to sell more of our product, perhaps, right? That might be it. Or is there a new competitor here that we need to know about? Or is there some other thing that's happening in our market that's suggesting that there's a challenge that we hadn't anticipated and we now need to take some action to position ourselves more effectively? If you're not monitoring the performance at that level, you'll never be able to know what it was, and that can erode the value of your business. So think about this for a second. I think we talked about the two performance curves, the two sides of the performance curve that will ultimately be evaluated in your business. And if you're in due diligence, and every time the due diligence team looks at the performance of the business based on the metrics that you've told him or her that the business will perform to, if you're achieving them or exceeding them, their inclination is to move more quickly. That means they want to extract the value that you're extracting from the business. They're going to want to go faster. If, on the other hand, you're not quite achieving those things, they're going to tend to slow down because you're going to have to come up with a reason. I think the example I've used in the past is, let's say you missed your numbers in the second quarter, and the question then is, well, why did that happen? Well, it happened because we overspent our marketing budget in March so that we could be prepared for a big May. Okay, I might accept that reasoning, but what I'm going to do is say, let's see how that turned out in May. So now I've added 60 days to my decision horizon because I want to see whether or not that's actually going to pay off. If it does pay off, then great. I feel good about continuing forward. But if it didn't pay off, I'm now going to have another set of questions around, okay, well, what about that marketing investment that you made did not work? And you're going to need to have the answers to those questions in order for them to feel comfortable that you really understand your business and understand how to navigate the market with the business you're running. Does that make sense? Okay. We talked a few weeks ago, or certainly at least twice now, about social media and social intelligence. And remember that what we're referring to here in the context of sales and marketing is using these communications mediums as a way to establish relationship in the market. So not all of them apply to all businesses. My business, we don't really do anything on Instagram and Snapchat. It's really not the space for our kind of business, right? On the other hand, something like Podopolo will probably be quite active in some of those venues, right? Because that's a great place to establish relationship with the listeners and with the customers that are going to feed the growth of that business, right? The key is that you want to see them not based on the metrics that they offer, but on the metrics that you're able to associate with real returns in the value of your business. So let's just say Facebook is a good channel for you to interact with your kind of prospect. Might be the case. Okay, well, what about it makes it that way? What are the things that a Facebook user or a Facebook user who's interacting with you are doing that makes them a better or not as good or more predictable or less predictable customer for what you're doing? And then what are you going to do to accommodate more of the good stuff and less of the unsuccessful stuff, right? Does that make sense? So really understanding how these channels work to either support what you're doing or not. Likes and follows is not the answer. You want to look at how you develop relationship in these different channels, right? Does that make sense? Any questions about that so far? Nisa, you got anything you want to throw in here?
Sure. Just to add, everything that we have discussed about setting parameters, setting goals and objectives, and then seeing how those turn out over time, measuring against those and perhaps adjusting those. This should be documented and captured somewhere. Because again, anything that's kept up here or is coming from the gut or instinct that can't be actually observed in reality by someone else to follow your line of thinking, that actually has no value. I mean, to the acquirer. To you, it has great value, but there's like a bad habit I think we all have to work on breaking, which is just assuming that we're going to remember our logic and our reasoning for why we came to a particular decision. There's actually been studies done that show that mentally people can hold about 13 thoughts at any given time, 13 thoughts. And that can be anything from like take the dog to the vet to don't forget dry cleaning to the LOIs being signed on Friday at noon. 13 thoughts, and then after that, your brain considers anything after 13 as infinity. So that's why people get overwhelmed. They feel like it's too much to handle. They don't know. So capturing your thoughts down in some system, even if it's just a notebook, and I've got mine, right here, right? Capturing those and finding some way to organize them is very, very, very valuable, because it's not actually infinity. It's just more than your brain can handle at any particular time. And that's part of the value of your business.
Right. So that's good, Anissa. Thanks for that. And so I would add to that capturing the data is one step. Analyzing and understanding why the data is the way it is another step. It's one thing to drive a campaign and not see the outcome you're looking for, but then driving another campaign and seeing, a better outcome than you thought. All right, well, what's the difference? You need to understand what is it that's different about those two campaigns. What's different about the target? What's different about the way they behave? What's different about the campaign itself, right? This is what gives you the leverage. Now, I'm not saying that everything has to be a roaring success. I'm saying, actually, to the contrary, that you need to understand why it is or is not a roaring success, so that when you're communicating this to others about the business, that they're able to see that you understand the dynamic that defines the success or lack of success on an ongoing basis within the business. That allows you to make refinements to your targeting, to your avatar. You can actually get to a place where, I know Missy and Matt, we spoke about this a few weeks ago, is that, okay, well, you've got lots of way to verticalize your target market. And, our senses can be that this is a really good place and this is not so good a place. But have we really done the analysis to understand how do we optimize this vertical versus that vertical? Do we really believe that one set of communications across all verticals is the same? Unlikely. So what would we have to do to optimize this one over that one, or to perform optimally in this category versus that category? And then you can begin to knock off those individual beachheads and ultimately end up with sort of the whole coastline of as your business environment, right? So I wanted to leave some extra time for Q&A today because we just covered a ton of information, and everybody has challenges in this area, because in many cases you're early stage. In other cases, you're sort of, a solopreneur trying to sort of just get from deal to deal and manage your day-to-day operation that way. In other cases, you have some metrics, but you're not really sure which ones are the ones that matter. So maybe some of you can share what your experience has been, maybe some questions, or let's get some dialogue going. Okay.
I'll go first here, Steve. And you and I talked about this back 2 years ago, I think. What do you feel like is the right ratio of salary versus commission with a salesperson?
Yeah, and that's a great question. A lot depends on the industry. But for instance, in your industry, I would say that what I used to do is structure two different kinds of compensation plan for salespeople in particular, and it bled through to marketing people as well. But my preference is that the minority of their compensation is base salary. So let's say 40%, right? 30 to 40%. The majority of their compensation is incentive or performance-based salary, and the performance can be broken up into commissions and bonus incentives. So, you know, there's some flat thresholds they can attain, or there's some MBOs they can attain that give them an immediate uplift on a flat bonus basis, but then there's a commission rate that runs in the background. The reason I like that structure is it allows me to provide very large incentives for overperformance. If you start with a low base, then on a percentage basis, let's say you're 40% base, 60% would be at plan performance, when what you really want is above plan performance. So something like that would allow me to pay, 20% incentive compensation for every 10% over performance. So you're giving them accelerated performance and accelerated compensation beyond 100%. So my objective was always to pay 200% of quota, 200% of their compensation at a performance of 120% of plan. So that incremental shift gave them lots of incentives to build that extra percentage, that extra 20% into their performance, because they're going to make twice the money, right? So
Yeah.
a 100K guy would be making 200K by doing 120K's worth of work. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. So for that kind of business, I think there's that. Now, I would also offer a 60-40 plan. But honestly, the offer of the 60-40 plan was a trick, right? Because what I wanted to filter out was the salespeople who said they were top performers, but would rely on the security of a salaried compensation in order to carry it. So if a salesperson chose the 60 or the 70% plan, I knew that they didn't have confidence in their own ability to make their own money. So they were going to look to me to secure their compensation over time. So that, I would offer it, but I wouldn't offer it, for the reason of giving it to them. I'd offer it as a filter in my recruiting to say, well, no, I'd rather have a guy who's confident enough in his sales ability to go out there and win the business, and recognize that when he exceeded quota, he was going to make a lot more money, right? Because if you took the 80% plan, okay, you're going to make, for 120% performance, you're going to make 120%, right? No acceleration. But if you'll take the 40%, rely on your own ability as a salesperson to perform, at 100%, you're going to make 200% of your money, right? That's the guy that I want on my team. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Right. This, by the way, rolls directly into how you provide an incentive for a channel partner as well. There's no reason why you can't create an incentive program for your channels to outperform the commitments they've made, right? Give them access to more money. Look, you're going to make the most money. I mean, that's the bottom line. Your objective is not to extract as many dollars out of every salesperson or every channel. Your objective is to generate the largest number of dollars through the channel. That's your goal, right? So you want to be willing to give that money up to provide the incentives, because you're picking up market share, you're picking up margin on the market, right? You're growing the value of the business, and that's the real metric here, right? So give up the margin and grab hold of the market share or the growth.
That's great. Thank you.
Good question.
Thanks.
Anything else from anyone else?
Steve, I got a question. Since you deal a lot in the technical world, and Jonathan may be able to jump in from his point of view as well, when you talk about the objectives for your own group your own business, and then, like you say, you want to build up the channel. How receptive would those people in the channel be to something like, here's our objectives. I want to sit down with you and your decision makers to see what your objectives are and see how we can make them match and make things better. Would they be fairly receptive to that?
I've always found it to be the case, yes. Because what you're showing them, you're actually helping them generate more predictability and resilience in their business by taking them through the same process. And you're also seeing where you can gain preference and advantage in their organization. So depending on the kind of channel, but let's say it's a value-added reseller or something. So they represent a lot of different products, right? What you want is for your product to be the one that's first and foremost on their salesperson's mind. You want them thinking about your product because they make more money on your product than they do on somebody else's product, right? So the only way you can do that is to get them to understand how your business works and to use that as a fulcrum to say, okay, so I'm going to give you guys the same kind of incentive program. So I not only did that with the leadership and decision makers at those companies, I did it with their salespeople. I help their salespeople understand that, hey, we've just done a great deal. And what it means is that if you can produce this much volume, you're going to make this much money and you're going to get a bonus from us, right? Now you've got incentives aligned. People are operating with the right objectives. Now, so what would end up happening over time is those salespeople from my partner channels would come to our sales meetings. They would partner with our sales guys because everybody understood that if we worked that way, we all made a lot more money. We all did a lot more good for our businesses. We all put ourselves in a much better position overall. And that would allow us a lot more degrees of freedom, end of quarter, end of month, end of year, right? To really understand what's the dynamic that's happening here. I would have executive sales leaders from channels come to me at the end of a quarter and say, hey, we're doing really well here. We're looking forward into the next quarter. Where are you relative to these objectives that you shared with us? Well, I might say I might be in a situation where maybe a couple of my guys didn't quite make it or something. So they would recognize it. Okay, well, I'll tell you what we'll do, we already know we've won this business. So we're gonna pre-purchase that volume now. That's gonna help you and it's gonna help us because now we can get extra margin on that business and we're helping you get over this hump because you had a couple of guys that didn't perform, right? Now you have a strategic partnership with a channel. Now that's different from channel stuffing. That's not what I'm suggesting. That's just actually making good business decisions with a partner that helps you both, right? That's an entirely different scenario. But if you don't have those conversations, John, you can't have that opportunity, right? And that then starts to look like channel stuffing, right? Everybody understand what I mean by that?
No.
Okay, channel stuffing is when you're looking at your performance over time and you need to make a financial objective that you perhaps are falling short of. So you call a channel partner and you say, look, I'm going to give you a 60% discount if you buy this much stuff now, whether they need it or not. You're just packing their warehouse full of stuff, right? So that you can make your number. Now that's a way to make your number. That's true. But think about it. You now put strain, you put compression on that channel partner. Now they've got to move a lot more volume in the next quarter, if that's the basis of the business relationship, in order to get back to zero. If you get to the end of the next quarter, they haven't moved that volume, you can no longer expect that channel to perform at the same level they're performing because they've already bought from you. They're not going to buy as much from you the next quarter, so that can hurt you. That's why channel stuffing is a bad idea, because over time, you stuff all your channels, now you've got no future business.
Right. And if you do the channel stuffing, would you also lower your map pricing for them?
Yeah, no, exactly, because you end up, you have to give them something,
Yeah.
right? Right? There's got to be some reason for them to do it.
Yeah,
So, so where it differs is that if I know how their channel is performing and they understand that I don't want to stuff them with inventory they can't use. I am willing to provide them an incentive to take inventory that they're already going to use. That's different. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
Evan, you got something there?
Yeah, I've got a quick question and something that's maybe a little bit more complex that I'm thinking through. On compensation, when you were saying it's like 50-50, and if they hit 120%, they make 200% of comp. What sort of like quota is that? Is that like a million if you do 1.2, or what kind of quota would be like a, where our numbers that would make sense in that
Yeah.
scenario?
I haven't done this arithmetic in a long time, so
Yeah.
all I can share with you is what it was when I was selling software.
I'll
right?
play with it. That's fine.
Right. But back then, if I had a sales guy who wanted to make 120K at plan, right, then he would have to carry a $2.5 to $3 million a year quota, right, in order for me to have any margin to work with on that deal.
Right.
Right. And by doing that, I could pay him by having it set there at over 20% performance. I could pay him 150 to 200% of that money. Right. So there was enough margin built into the model. So you have to play with those numbers. That's what it was back then. I don't know what it is now.
Yeah, that makes sense. At those numbers, bumping them to 200% makes sense. I kind of like that model a lot. I'm actually kind of, I'm in the process of thinking about that, documenting and formalizing a lot of our partnerships. The way that I have like 44 people referring us deals, and I need to solidify it with everyone. So there's kind of an opportunity to do so in the right way.
Yeah.
I started with, for everyone, we're an Amazon ad agency. We help people grow on Amazon. We started with like 10% of year one revenues that we collect. And then, I experimented with adding like 5% in year two of revenues that we collect. I feel like it's not as strong of a model as it could be. I don't know. I'm looking for some thoughts and feedback.
Well, I guess the question is, why does it come down? It's the first question I would ask. Because you're not doing any less work year two than you did year one. Why are you taking less?
Don't have an answer to that. It's just
I'd want to know that. I mean, if I were you, I'd want to know, why do we have to take less? I mean, there might be a reason, but I don't know what that reason is. Just because you were successful in the first year doesn't mean you should be paid less for the second year, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're not doing anything in year two. It is what it is. That's a good point.
Well, and I would also add in accelerators. So I'd go through the process of saying, okay, so 10% of year one based on these financial objectives. Let's say it's 20 million or something, right? I don't know what the numbers are in your business, but let's say it's 20 million. All right. So for year one, I'm going to make $2 million when I hit $20 million in revenue, right? That's 10%. Year two, your number goes from 20 million to 30 million. So I'm going to make 3 million on that. But if I do 4 million, or 40 million rather, I want an extra million, right? So your rate should accelerate as they accelerate. Now your incentives are aligned. The way you're proposing it, your incentives are disaligned. The more growth you give them, the less you get. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I didn't say exactly how we have it set up properly. I mean, I have it where the first customer, they get 10%, the second one, they get 10 and 5 that they pass over, but it's still not great. I like the accelerator model. I got to play with it.
Okay. I mean, I don't really understand the model, but the bottom line is, I think, I'm trying to remember our conversation of a few months ago, Matt and Missy, but I know, Matt, you and I spent some time on this where we were looking at how over time the structure you were operating of would create a disincentive, and you didn't want that. You wanted an uplift on the incentive. You wanted to get more for your effort over time, not less.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, because
Yeah.
they're getting more value. I mean, remember that we're not talking about money as an exchange of incremental inventory. Money is an exchange in value. So inventory is a piece of the exchange, but you know, the value of money has nothing to do with the number of units. It's not there's not a pile of dollars somewhere, right? So think about money in a different way. There's not like this big pile of money and you get so much and they get so much and somebody else gets so much. Money, or the value of money, is an exchange of value. So if you're adding value to their business over time, you should get a larger exchange rate on your effort.
So we've got a sales rep out of Southern California that we're pretty excited about, and he's I believe he's at 10%. He's at 10%, and then he had even said, you know, and then once I get to a certain level and stuff, you know, maybe that comes down a little bit to 7% as that grows. But and he suggested that to us, and we didn't put anything in writing to go at any point where it would go to a different direction. We just said, hey, we're happy paying you the 10%, and you know, I mean, that's our margins covered there, and if that gives you plenty of incentive, that sounds good to us. And we didn't really even detail, you know, when it would drop. I didn't want to go there. So now I'm thinking, as we talk through this, that I don't even want to do that. I actually want to maybe bump him up to 12% if he hits a certain number or something.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's so. I don't know. I'd really
like
scratch
that.
my head if a salesperson ever came to me and told me that they want their commission rate to go down. I'd wonder what's going on. But I don't know what the relationship is. But I think that there's an opportunity in there. So you can create the acceleration a lot of different ways. You can do it with commission rate, which is what you're suggesting, take his rate from 10% to 12%.
Yeah.
But you could also take a look at what he's doing and ask him to take on a more strategic objective in your company and associate an MBO with that. So, okay, well, you perform at this level, or this level plus 10%, and you help us establish, let's say, 3 more channels. We're going to give you an extra 20K, you know, plus 1% of the residual or something like that, right? So you have lots of degrees of freedom.
Bonus structure. I think bonus structure is good rather than just a percentage of the commission going up. I feel like that should just maintain, and then you can reward based on milestones hit.
Yeah, or specific performance objectives. Let's say you come up with the different colored tape, and you want to hit the market big on that. You can give him his regular performance commission on gross sales, right? And then say, but for every 1,000 rolls of this you sell, we're going to give you an extra however many hundreds or thousands of dollars, right? So now he has an incentive that's aligned with your objectives for your business.
Right. Yeah. That's a very good way to do it with them.
I mean, whatever it is, right? I mean, this is pretty well understood. I know, Jonathan, you probably do this yourself. When you roll out a new piece of software, or you roll out a new service, you want your salespeople to pick it up. All right, put a spiff on it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the nature of salespeople. That you don't have to talk them into that, right? You put a bonus on something, they're going to go do that.
Exactly. That's how it works.
Yeah. Exactly. And as far as getting ahead of ourselves a bit, but on payment on this, if he opens up an account and it's a consignment type of deal where they are going to take on, they want us to ship them X amount of product, but at any time, if it's not selling well or whatever, they change buyers and they can ship it back to us and get a refund. Do we still pay him up front for bringing
You have to decide. You can do one of two things. You can pay him and make it recoverable against net billable, right? So you have to collect the money. And if you don't collect all the money, you get to recover the commission.
Mhm.
right? Or you can tell him that he gets paid his commission when the volume clears.
Yeah. So when we get paid, he gets paid. That's how I
You
would.
realize the money, he realizes the money. That's correct.
Yes.
And
Okay.
Steve, if I can throw one more thing in, so we're talking about the sales folks and then the channels, and of course there's crossover between them because the sales guy may sell something by working with the channel, which you hope for. The third thing we've got going is just basically partner referrals too. So, First United Bank that we work with real closely, that was our very first bank that we implemented provision for. If they bring in another bank to us as a referral, they get either 5 or 10%, depending on the level at which they brought them in and how much involvement they had and how much our sales guy had to do versus what they did before it ever got to us. So like Steve was saying, you have to kind of factor in multiple levels of compensation.
Yeah. And a lot of times in that situation, it's a great one, Jonathan. A lot of times the referring agent, in this case, a company, can't take compensation, right? But it could be translated in the form of discounts.
Yeah,
So, for every $100,000 of referrals, they're going to realize $100,000 worth of net discount on a year's subscription or something like that, right?
absolutely. Yep. And that's exactly what we do.
Yeah, because they can't really get it. They can't take a check. How are they
Right.
going to account for the check they got from a merchant, right?
Yeah, that's the great thing about banks.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been great, guys. I've got another call. I hope this was useful. I wanted to try to get into sort of discussion mode as early as possible. And again, if you want more conversation time around any of this, there's a way for you to schedule some time with me and we can talk about any specific circumstance you have. And I'm happy to spend the time doing that. And then other than that, we'll get the recording up and we'll look to get back together next week. I say hesitantly because I think I'm going to be on a plane next Wednesday. So we might have to shift the date next week. I'll let you know as soon as I take a look at my calendar.
All right.
Wow, you're going to get on a plane? How
I
novel.
am. How about that? How about that?